Welcome everybody to AFSO21 Radio. You're listening to the Weekend Wrap-Up.
Welcome everyone to another episode of the Weekend Wrap-Up here on AFSO21 Radio. I'm your host, Kevin Ferrara. And for those that listen to our promo about this episode, we think you're going to go ahead and enjoy this what I consider an explosive episode. It is the DoD IG's latest report titled Evaluation of the Department of Defense Actions to Control Contaminant Effects from Perfluoroalkyl and Polyfluoroalkyl Substances at the Department of Defense Installations. Basically, this episode is going to cover the DoD IG's report on their several findings regarding what the DoD did and did not do pertaining to PFAS contamination at some military installations. They didn't do an entire survey of all installations. They narrowed it down to a select few. But what we see in this report is explosive. So stay tuned, get ready, grab your cup of coffee. We're going to hear from our sponsor, Fire Department Coffee, in the meantime, and then we'll be back.
Firefighters work long shifts. That's the nature of the job. If your station is like most, coffee is what keeps you going. That's why you should check out Fire Department Coffee. Veteran-owned and run by firefighters, Fire Department Coffee offers a wide variety of delicious coffee, including their signature line of spirit-infused coffee, all roasted by hand and delivered right to your door. Even better, 10% of net proceeds from every sale goes to benefit wounded, ill, or injured firefighters and other first responders. And they've got a special deal for the Weekend Wrap-Up listeners. Enter discount code AFSO21, that's AFSO21, at checkout to get 10% off your next order at Fire Department Coffee. FireDepartmentCoffee.com, that's FireDePT Coffee.com.
All right, folks, welcome back. As we said at the top of the podcast here, before we heard from our sponsor, Fire Department Coffee, this report I consider it to be an explosive report because it identifies some serious concerns, some issues that have occurred and not occurred within the DoD regarding PFAS contamination. So hang on to your hats. We're going to go ahead and get started here. So this particular DoD IG report, it was published July 22nd, 2021. So it recently came out. Now, some of you may have seen this already on social media. Military Times has already covered it briefly. The reporter did a good job basically summarizing what this report entails. We're going to get into it a little bit deeper because not a lot of folks are doing that. So this report is 82 pages. I'm not going to go through all 82 pages. I'm going to highlight some things, but we will be posting links to this specific report, this specific report, so you can go ahead and read through it, either as you're listening to this podcast or after the podcast, and then you can decide for yourself if it's explosive or not. But in our opinions here, those that we reached out to already, there's some eyebrow raising things in here that we found. So the title of the report is, again, the Evaluation of the Department of Defense Actions to Control Contaminant Effects from Perfluoroalkyl and Polyfluoroalkyl Substances, otherwise known as PFAS, at Department of Defense installations. And you're going to see me pan back and forth here. I've got my notes up on the screen. Those that have watched me before, I bounce around. I've got notes everywhere, so more so on this episode than any others. So the objective of this report, it's a twofold, and I'm reading right out of the IG's report. It states the objective of this evaluation was to determine the extent that the DoD has taken steps to identify, mitigate, and remediate contamination from perfluoroalkyl and polyfluoroalkyl substances, or PFAS, at DoD installations, and identify populations exposed to PFAS at DoD installations and inform them of the associated health and safety concerns. Now, there's some background on this. It goes back to July 25th, 2019. There was 31 members of Congress that requested the DoD Office of Inspector General undertake a review of the DoD's use of PFAS at military sites around the country. And because there's so many, we've heard upwards of 700 current and former DoD installations here in the United States. A lot of those, when I say former, they went through a BRAC closure, like Chanute Air Force Base. That's been gone for 25 years. Physically, geographically, it's still there. A lot of the buildings are still there, but the base closed in 93. And you've heard me on other podcasts talk about that. 25 years later, there's still PFAS contamination within the ground. So we know PFAS is persistent. It doesn't go away. That's why it's called forever chemicals. And it's getting a lot of attention. And I think that's really with the public pressure that's ongoing, some pressure from Congress. This is sort of why the DoD IG got involved. And those that aren't familiar with what an Inspector General office is in the military, think of in law enforcement where you have internal affairs. They inspect their own. They look for the things that an officer or a department may be doing incorrectly or illegally. The DoD IG, the Inspector General's office, is typically it's pretty much the same thing. They go in and they look for the rights and wrongs. Hopefully they walk in there and everything's good. A lot of times folks will make an IG complaint. The IG has to get involved and they'll go inspect it. They'll do an assessment, generate a report and say, these were our findings and these are our recommendations. And it's really up to the commanders, those that they're inspecting, the IG that's inspecting, to implement or whatever they want to do with these recommendations. Often not, the commanders will accept those recommendations and make change. Each major command, especially in the Air Force, each major command will have its own IG. Oftentimes the installations will have an IG office, not as big as the DoD's, but that's the way. Basically, like I said, the internal affairs, they're basically inspecting themselves. So getting back into the IG report here again. This sort of all started back in 2019. You heard me at the top saying only a handful of military installations were selected. So what happened? The DoD IG team come in and they say the following 6 current and former DoD installations that we selected host or hosted active duty military, National Guard, or DoD civilians and military families. So active duty Army was Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Army National Guard was Camp Grayling in Michigan. Active duty Navy was Naval Air Station Oceana and Naval Auxiliary Landing Field in Virginia. Active duty Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton, California. Active duty Air Force, Peterson Air Force Base, Colorado. And former Peace Air Force Base in New Hampshire. Just to give you a little history, Peterson has a lot of PFAS contamination out there, and the former Peace Air Force Base has a significant amount of PFAS contamination. Those two, there's a lot of environmental groups that are working, trying to get the DoD, the Air Force to start remediation efforts at these sites. They're getting a lot of pushback from the Air Force, a lot of lip service, if you will. So it's ongoing, but it's not just contamination on the installation. It's gotten into the drinking water off the installation, and now you have not only military personnel and DoD civilians, but you have civilians within the local communities that are contaminated and exposed to these toxic and deadly PFAS chemicals. It's interesting, they chose Naval Air Station Oceana down in Virginia. Obviously, there's PFAS contamination there. I wish they would have gone just up the highway to Joint Base Langley Eustis, Langley Air Force Base specifically there in Hampton, Virginia. Again, 2.2 million parts per trillion of PFAS contamination in on-base groundwater that we're pretty well certain here at AFSO21 Radio, the weekend wrap-up, that, because I was there for 10 years, I was assigned to that base for 10 years, that groundwater contamination has gone off the installation into the local river and contaminated, suspected of contaminating seafood, crabs, fish that are then sold to local markets. So, again, the DoD selected 6 installations. It looks like they had 5 active, 1 former, for this survey, this assessment that they did. And they also held meetings with the DLA, Defense Logistics Agency officials involved with storage and disposal of PFAS-containing materials. And 4 of those was DLA headquarters out of Fort Belvoir, Virginia, the Defense Supply Center out of Richmond, Virginia, Defense Fuel Support Point, Verona, New York, and the ULA Distribution, Susquehanna, Pennsylvania. So here, I'm from PA. They come up and had some conversations with the DLA folks regarding the storage. It looks like a disposal because active duty military is not disposing it. There's a whole process on how that works, and it all goes through the DLA. So they start getting into the description of PFAS. I'm not going to bore you with that. If you want to know more about PFAS, listen to my previous podcast. We get in depth with it. But basically, since the 1940s, there's a wide variety of commercial and industrial products have included PFAS. So this goes back, you've heard me talk about since the 1970s with PFAS and AFFF. PFAS actually goes back a few decades prior to that, since the 1940s. Depending on who you talk to, some researchers are saying there's upwards of 10,000 man-made chemicals that fall into this group called PFAS. Here they're talking about, the EPA identified more than 600 types of PFAS that are known to have been used in commercial industrial products in the manufacturing process in the past decade. So there is quite a lot out there. We're only talking about a handful in regards to the PFAS blood testing, which you'll hear me talk about here later on in the podcast. So the report scales down through here, and they reiterate what we've been saying here at the weekend wrap up. A lot of firefighters, a lot of researchers have saying many PFAS do not break down easily in the environment. Again, they're persistent. That's why they're called forever chemicals. They can remain in your body anywhere between 2 and 32 years. They have a high half-life, meaning, if you're, whatever your levels may be today, you see what the half-life is, within probably about 5 to 7 years is what we've seen. Then they start breaking down to half. So that's why the whole 32 years comes into play, simply because of this half-life that's in there. And each PFAS chemical is different. They're not all the same. So like PFOA may break down sooner or later than PFAS or PFHXS or PFNA. So do the research. We have some of it we can provide for those that are interested. So going down through again, the IG talks about potential health effects of PFAS exposure, and basically they're just gathering information that's already out there. They haven't really done their own research on this. Why duplicate effort? So they look at the ATSDR, which summarizes the current knowledge of potential adverse health effects from exposure to PFAS in its 2020 fact sheet for the public. And within that fact sheet, it says Although more research is needed, some studies in people have shown that PFAS may interfere with the body's natural hormones, increase cholesterol levels, affect the immune system, and increase the risk of some cancers. Well, folks, you've heard me talk about, for me personally, I've got elevated cholesterol levels. I'm on medication to try to curb those. And my doctor has done this several times to where we've stopped the medication for a short period, and those cholesterol levels spike right back up. So without that medication, my cholesterol, for me personally, my cholesterol levels would be not off the chart, but they would be high. Same thing with my triglycerides. Although, you know, here in this report, they don't talk about that. That's another adverse effect of repeated exposure to PFAS is high triglycerides, high cholesterol. The big concern that's going on now is, you heard me say, affects the immune system. You know, everybody's out getting their COVID shots, COVID vaccines. You know, your body breaks down the PFAS chemicals, the substances break down that immune system, and we're seeing more and more people getting sick. Whereas if they had a healthy immune system, they may likely not get sick or sick as much. And we all know, firefighters, audience members that are listening out there, PFAS increases the risk of some cancers. We've seen this, the typical cancers within the fire service community, in males: testicular, kidney, colon, liver cancer. There's a full range that's out there. Non-Hodgkin lymphoma, skin cancers are popping up. I'm getting a lot of firefighters that talk about that now. They're seeing more and more different types of skin cancers because of the direct contact. Once that AFFF that contains PFAS gets on your skin, well, obviously, you know, your skin's going to react to that over time. You're not going to see anything immediate, but over time, years, decades, these cancers are starting to pop up now, and that has some firefighters concerned. Because the NFPA has come out and they said that occupational cancer is the leading cause of death of firefighters. It used to be cardiac-related, stress-related emergencies. Now it is cancers, occupational cancers. And you know, unfortunately, AFFF that contains PFAS, turnout gear that we now know contains PFAS, that's increasing the risk of these occupational cancers. And we'll talk about that as the podcast continues here. So it goes through in length. It really starts talking about, you know, some different things from the ATSDR, talking about research and some other things. But then it gets into, this report talks about the DoD uses materials containing PFAS. We know they're using AFFF, but they also talk about some other things. And it's stating in here, the DoD officials use products and materials commonly available to U.S. home and business owners that contain PFAS. We know that. So they say, for example, DoD officials purchase foods, packaging, and materials that may contain PFAS, use water-resistant clothing that may contain PFAS. DoD officials also use products such as fire suppressants and fire-resistant aviation hydraulic fluids that are largely limited to the DoD, civilian airports, and local fire departments. So we know the foam, the firefighting foam, that's limited to local fire departments. I don't see the layperson out there, the common citizen, buying firefighting foam and using it. So it's specific to an industry, an agency, that being the fire protection emergency services, airports. It's interesting where they say the aviation hydraulic fluids. That sort of goes back to, you can start to see that's why there's a mil spec. So we have these fire-resistant aviation hydraulic fluids, some of the fuels. So they have to create these mil specs out there in order to be compatible with these and suppress the fire. So, and then the document continues. It says, the AFFF used by the DoD has historically contain PFAS and PFOA. Well, we know that simply based on the fact that the U.S. Navy invented AFFF due to incidents that occurred on aircraft carriers. They wanted something that would suppress those aircraft fires quickly and be able to save the ship. So the Navy invented and patented AFFF. They contracted it out with manufacturers, one in particular 3M, to mass produce it. And what we have today is a product of that research and development. And unfortunately, it took us almost 50 years to find out that the foam that was invented, patented, marketed, and mass produced contains toxic PFAS chemicals. Chemicals these manufacturers knew since the 40s, because they were in the business before they started making AFFF. They were already in the business of using some of these PFAS chemicals, so they just incorporated it into the foam manufacturing. Never told anybody, never told firefighters that, hey, this stuff is hazardous, could be harmful, make sure you wear proper personal protective equipment. That was never done. We were always told, oh, it's soap and water, it's perfectly fine, you can get it on your skin, you can spray kids, you'll be fine. We know that's not the truth anymore. So it talks about with a shelf life, the IG report is stating if stored properly, AFFF concentrates have a long shelf life and can remain in the DoD inventory for up to 25 years. Well, I've seen it. There's a lot of old foam that was out there before I retired. Those that are familiar with the old green 5-gallon jugs, the pails, there was a lot of that still in storage areas. As long as it's not open, it's stored properly, you can, it's still usable. I know at one point during my career, they were trying to get rid of the old foam, so we would have large pit fires. That foam would be used, the old green jugs, the pails, that would be poured into the trucks and disposed of that way. Instead of pouring it down the drain, that, I'm certain that happened at some installations, just to get rid of it, and then they threw the containers, threw them away. That was before all the environmental concerns started coming out in the 2000s. So, and then just scrolling through the report, the EPA actions related to PFAS. And it's stating from the early 2000s to 2015, the EPA worked with U.S. manufacturers to voluntarily phase out the production of PFAS and PFOA in the United States. Over time, U.S. manufacturers transitioned to the use of alternatives that do not contain PFAS and PFOA. Therefore, in the United States, PFAS and PFOA have not been used as ingredients or in the process of manufacturing products, including AFFF concentrates, since the phase-out. I'm not buying that. And we research can disprove that as well. And I say that because just because the manufacturer is saying, remember, they voluntarily phased out the production of PFAS and PFOA. There was no requirement, there was no mandate that says you have to get rid of this. These manufacturers have claimed they voluntarily removed it. However, we here at AFSO21 Radio, the Weekend Wrap-Up, other agencies, other concerned communities are still trying to get these manufacturers to prove that their products do not contain PFAS or PFOA and/or PFAS and/or PFOA. They will not admit or prove any of that because of industry trade secrets. Because once they say, hey, our products don't contain this, or it does contain this, now that competitiveness is lost or it's disrupted. Okay? We know this with foam manufacturers. We know this with firefighter turnout gear manufacturers. we've seen it before. Personally, for me, with certain high-profile foam manufacturers out there that produced foam from the start, got involved either midway or early on. It's taken us almost 50 years to find out the truth through testing. And testing is not cheap. It's expensive. It's timely. But it's taken us nearly 50 years of listening that, oh, our products are safe. We would never put anything in there. In fact, 3 of the major manufacturers, foam manufacturers, testified before Congress and said, our products are perfectly safe to humans. Folks, that's bullshit. We know that's not true. There's been independent testing. We know it's not true. There's massive amounts of research out there, to include the military's own research from the 1970s and the 1980s, to where it says AFFF manufactured by Company X, there was fish kills. They did fish kill studies, and then they did lab tests with mice and other animals that showed tumors developing through repeated exposure to AFFF. So what I'm getting at is, why would we believe that manufacturers have truly transitioned to the use of alternatives that do not contain PFAS and PFOA? And you know, I'm sure there are some out there, but put the proof on the table. Show us beyond a preponderance of the doubt that your products do not contain PFAS and PFOA. And until they can do that, I'm sorry, folks, I cannot believe these companies, as much as I would love to. I cannot believe these companies and what they're saying, that their products no longer contain PFAS and PFOA. So I wish the DoD IG would go back to that, would go back to this specific paragraph and reconsider what they said, and think about this, because if you just tell somebody voluntarily phase out and you don't mandate them to do it, and that's what we're trying to do today, is there's various organizations that are trying to get the NFPA standards changed. We're trying to get industry to change and say it's a requirement. You cannot put this product in there because of its known hazard and toxicities. But right now, everything's voluntary. If a company chooses to do it, that's on them. At the same time, we're trying to say, okay, if you're going to have PFAS in your products, create an ingredient list, if you will, of your product, so consumers can look at that and make a decision on their own. Meaning, you have 2 sets of turnout gear. One has PFAS and the other one doesn't. Maybe the one with PFAS is a little bit more durable as opposed to the one that doesn't. You have to be able to give the consumer options, and you have to be upfront. For me personally, a company that's going to be upfront and truthful, full transparency of what's in their product, I'm going to buy their product over somebody that I consider to be a little bit shady. But that's just me, folks. I'm hoping firefighters, leaders out there feel the same way. So scrolling down through, back to the IG, I get on these ramp ups here, talking about things. So back to this IG report. They within a few of the paragraphs, they say, according to the EPA, officials responsible for drinking water systems, including drinking water systems on DoD installations, should, and they're referencing back to the EPA's lifetime health advisory of 70 parts per trillion in drinking water. So again, they're saying, according to the EPA, officials responsible for drinking water systems, including systems on DoD installations, should notify affected populations if PFAS and PFOA levels in sources of drinking water exceed the lifetime health advisories. Nearly every installation I've been to has, well, in fact, every installation, every Air Force installation I was assigned to, has elevated levels of PFAS contamination, PFAS and PFOA. When you look at the environmental working groups interactive map, you plug in a location, it's going to give you a report, a summary, dashboard, if you will, and then there's a hyperlink to the actual report. It's not my numbers, it's not EWG's numbers, it's not Joe Citizen's numbers. That data comes directly from either the DoD or the service branch specific, i.e. the Air Force. So you heard me talk about Joint Base Langley USIS, Langley Air Force Base specifically. 2.2 million parts per trillion of PFAS and PFOA contamination. Yet nobody during the 10 years I was assigned there had notified myself or others of that level of contamination, despite what the IG is putting in this report, saying that those responsible for drinking water systems, to include those on DoD installations, should notify affected populations. And, you know, this gets down to wordsmithing, if you will. The key word here being should. Okay, that's whenever you read a document that says should, that's pretty much a recommendation or a suggestion. There's no mandate. There's no teeth behind that. So they're saying, you know, according to the EPA officials, you know, those responsible for drinking water should notify affected populations. But if they don't, well, nothing's really going to happen to them. There's no enforcement. Again, there's no teeth. They further go on and say, should describe actions taken to reduce risks to affected populations and provide information to affected populations on the risks associated with exposure to PFAS and PFOA in sources of drinking water above the EPA lifetime health levels. So, again, that word should is really, it's allowing the DoD to get away with continuous contamination, continuous exposure of PFAS and PFOA. Now, if that had said shall, then we're talking about a whole different story here. Especially those, you know, I had a fire chief who used to call me F. Lee Bailey because I would always look at the legal side of things. You know, he would always ask me, he goes, hey, you know, F. Lee, what do you think about this? You know, should it say shall or should or what? Because we wanted to see, we were more focused on enforcement. You look at a lot of public laws, it'll state in there shall, meaning the individual is required to do something or the agency is required to do something. But, you know, once you put should in there, there's no enforcement. There's nothing you can really do. It's like, oh, if you do it, that's great. If you don't, move on, scroll on, as people say. So that's something that, you know, concerns me, that the DoD, and this really goes to Congress, and, you know, the federal government. Congress needs to get involved in this. They're the lawmakers, and they need to hold these other agencies, federal agencies, accountable for this and say, let's wordsmith this. Let's not make it a recommendation or a suggestion. Let's make it a mandate. Because really, I mean, something as significant as PFAS and PFOA contamination, especially, you know, when it's 2.2 million parts per trillion, you know, I don't want that information coming across a commander's desk or a senior leader's desk. They look at it and be like, no, it's not a priority for me. I'm not going to go ahead and tell anybody. And then years later, we find out people got sick because commander whoever didn't take a proactive approach or didn't step up and do the right thing. So scrolling on through the document, they touch base on the National Defense Authorizations Act. And we know in 2019, 2020, Congress included various PFAS requirements to the NDAA. And in the FY 2019 NDAA, it required the Secretary of Defense to conduct an assessment of the human health implications of PFAS exposure. And the NDAA, and I'm reading off of the report here, says the NDAA required the assessment to include an analysis of health effects associated with PFAS and an estimate of the number of members of armed forces and veterans who may have been exposed to PFAS while serving in the armed forces. Well, if they had actually done that, and I haven't seen any of these estimates, maybe I'm just not looking in the right place, but I have not been able to find these. If they did a true estimate of the number of members of the armed forces and veterans who may have been exposed to PFAS while serving in the armed forces, you're looking at hundreds of thousands of individuals that served and are currently serving. You look at for the firefighters that are out there, the military audience members, old school Chinook. Look back at how many firefighters, DoD civilian and military firefighters, transitioned through Chinook over the years to get their firefighter training. We were exposed to PFAS and PFOA almost daily, especially when we were doing our ARF training. The firefighters that are in Goodfellow Air Force Base right now, going through the fire academy there, same thing. Up until about 2016, when they put that basically a moratorium out there restricting the use of AFFF, they were using it all the time. They were being exposed to it. Municipal fire departments, you can't get away from it. So the fact is, in the DoD is simply not. They're simply not doing what they need to do to track individuals. It's been asked by several members of Congress. I've asked, Congress myself. They've talked about doing a PFAS registry. That could be where they're going with this. Require the assessment to include an analysis and an estimate of the number of members. We've seen that done with burn pit registries. That's a way to sort of get that estimate. Again, they're talking about doing a PFAS registry. That'll get you an estimate, but it's not an accurate estimate. The DoD has documentation on every firefighter, military firefighter, DoD civilian firefighter. They have that data today. They don't need to do an estimate. They could say, if you were a firefighter, damage controlman, whatever they want to call you, they have record of that. They could pull that stuff today and say, here is how many personnel we believe that were exposed to PFAS chemicals. But from what I understand, they're not doing that. They're not pulling that data. So then that same paragraph goes on to say the FY 2020 NDAA further required the Secretary of Defense to provide blood testing to determine and document potential exposure to PFAS for each firefighter of the DoD during their annual physical exam beginning in FY 2021. So we know October 1 of 2020, that was the beginning of FY 21. DoD military and civilian firefighters were offered a blood test. Okay? There was no... The IG report talks about requiring a blood test, but it's sort of how do I want to say it? It's misleading the way the IG report is drafted here. Because, again, the 2020 NDAA said the Secretary of Defense was required to provide blood testing, but there's nothing in there stipulating that members were required to receive that blood test. So those audience members that are listening or watching, military, DoD, civilians, firefighters, you know, you go in for your annual occupational health exam, they're going to offer you that PFAS blood test. If you decline it, you have to sign a waiver. It goes into your medical records, and then you cannot get another blood test, or you cannot be eligible for that blood test until the following year when your next occupational exam comes due. I've had firefighters call me up and they say, hey, you know, I initially turned it down because I wasn't sure about it, but now I'm hearing about all this stuff. I went to see my doc, tried to get it, and they turned me away. They said I couldn't do it until the following year. Okay, I encourage those audience members out there that are listening or watching, DoD, military and or civilian, take the damn blood test for several reasons. It's a baseline. It's going to track, you're going to be able to see your numbers, and also it's free. If you're active duty, DoD, military, civilian, it is free. For individuals like myself, veteran, former military firefighter, I'm no longer eligible for that test. It's not included in the 2020 NDAA for veterans or former firefighters, or damage control repairmen. You know, if you worked with foam in a firefighting capacity, if you're former, you are no longer eligible. We have to pay out of pocket upwards of $700 or more, depending on how many PFAS chemicals you went tested for. You know, there's the PFAS 6, the DoD tests for 6. There's civilian independent testing labs that do the same 6. Some labs do upwards of 32 types of PFAS chemicals. But again, the more you test, the more it's going to cost you. For me, it's non-reimbursable. Yeah, I can't talk today. So basically, I'm out of pocket $700. Now, TRICARE does do a PFOA test. It took me a year to figure that out, but that test come back, and I'm not shocked, as non-detectable, simply because the lab that's doing it, which is the same lab that's contracted by the DoD through LabCorp, that number, because their equipment is calibrated higher than what some of these civilian testing labs are doing, it's coming back as non-detectable. Some of the civilian labs have calibrated their equipment to get a smaller number, meaning they can get a more pinpoint accurate amount of PFAS contamination in your blood. So that's something to consider. But like I said, to the active duty military and DoD civilian firefighters out there listening, please get your blood test done. As we're scrolling through this document, they talk about environmental safety and occupational health policy. And they're talking about the USD ANS. They published a DoD directive, DoD 4715.1E, which requires, and we're going to have links to, you know, if you hear me reference something, I'm going to have links to these. You know, I'm going to have a link to this report, and then I'm also going to track down the links to these specific DoD directives, as long as they're publicly accessible. Some of these things you can't get to, but if it's public information, publicly accessible, I'm going to put the link out there for you to look at. So there's the DoD directive 4715.1E, which requires all DoD organizations to plan, program, and budget to manage environment, safety, and occupational health risks caused by their activities. Well, firefighting, exposure to PFAS, you would think that falls into play here. So DoD 4715.1E also requires all DoD organizations to evaluate all activities for emerging ESOH, which is your Environmental Safety Occupational Health Resource Requirements. 4715.1e requires the DoD to protect DoD personnel from risks including accidental death or occupational illness. That's interesting because how many firefighters, military, DoD, civilian firefighters out there are sick today? Self-included. Knock on wood, I don't have cancer, but I've got other illnesses that are associated with exposure to PFAS. There's quite a few that I've talked to that unfortunately have cancer, some terminal, due to this exposure. So had the DoD properly protected DoD personnel from these risks, they may or may not be sick. They may still be here today. Unfortunately, we lost a lot of great veterans, former firefighters, due to occupational illnesses that, I'm just going to say it, most likely could have been prevented. And the paragraph goes on to say, additionally, 4715.1e requires the DoD to protect the public from risks including injury, illness, or death caused by DoD activities. So that one is really critical because how many communities surrounding these contaminated military installations have elevated levels of PFAS? How many of those civilians living in these communities are sick? How many of those individuals have died? Again, this DoD document requires the DoD to protect the public from those risks of PFAS, including injury, illness, or death caused by DoD activities. And DoD activities, that's firefighting, folks. That's things that are going on within the DoD. So aircraft fire training, actual emergencies. If it was a DoD asset that released that PFAS, okay, that's a DoD activity. Okay, the foam didn't just jump out of the container on its own and pour itself into the ground. And I'm not faulting any firefighters or fire chiefs out there that legitimately did not know that firefighting foam was toxic and hazardous to humans and or the environment. Okay, we were led to believe AFFF was simply soap and water. We were told that, at least I was, from day one at Chanute. When we first started using foam, that it was safe, it was perfectly fine. And that was echoed to multiple installations that I was assigned to. At first, I thought it was just me. I thought maybe I misheard it. It's just my imagination. But as I started talking to firefighters over the years, and they're echoing the same thing, that's a concern. But again, what we did, what we were ordered to do through policy procedure, those daily function checks of the ARF apparatus, go out, spray the foam, make sure the truck works. That was a DoD activity, plain and simple. That wasn't just, Airman Snuffy out there just choosing to do it on his own. They were told to do that. So looking at this document, and I'll be honest, I had no knowledge of 4715.1e until I started scrolling through this DoD IG report. So like I said, I'm going to post this out there. I encourage all my audience members that are interested, get intimately familiar with what that document entails and what it's saying should happen. So folks, we are at 46 minutes into this podcast. This is going to be a little longer podcast than normal. So what I want to do is I want to go ahead and take a break here. And I want to introduce you to a company that I reached out to for a particular piece of equipment, a radio strap. And we're familiar with different radio straps that are out there, but this company in particular really went above and beyond to get the product to me. I'm extremely happy with the product. It's H6, Homeland 6, and yeah, it's just it's a phenomenal piece of equipment. We often overlook, we don't think too much about, but yeah, let's take a short break. Let's hear from what H6 is, and then once we're done, we'll be back and we'll pick up here on the DoD IG report. Hey folks, Kevin Ferrara here, host of the popular AFSO21 Radio, the weekend wrap-up fire protection and safety podcast. I want to introduce you to the amazing H6 radio strap. Unlike leather radio straps, the H6 military-grade nylon radio straps are washable with PPE gear in commercial extractors, enabling you to properly decon them and reduce exposure to sweat, dirt, bacteria, and viruses, as well as toxic contaminants. The H6 radio strap is made by Homeland 6, veteran and firefighter owned. I own an H6 radio strap and I'm very impressed at the durability and versatility of it. Because of the MOLLE webbing on the shoulder harness, users can adjust where to place the mic or attach small accessories like shears or pouches. So check out the amazing H6 radio strap by visiting homeland6.com. That's homelandsix.com, and tell them you heard about their product on the Weekend Wrap-Up podcast. All right, folks, we are back. Yeah, check out H6 Homeland 6 radio straps. Those that have a need for them, and really every firefighter, EMS, even police officers out there really should have a radio on them at all times. So check out H6 Homeland 6 radio straps. They're made in America. As you heard in the promo for them, phenomenal piece of equipment. Lightweight, durable, versatile. Yeah, give them a shout out and let them know that here AFSO21 Radio we sent them over to we sent you over to them. So hopefully my voice lasts for this second half of this podcast. There's a lot more information coming out of this IG report, this DoD IG report, that I consider to be explosive. Just based on the findings and recommendations that the DoD has identified, the DoD IG. So picking up where we left off within this document, another title, it's called Emerging Chemicals of Environmental Concern Program. And they start talking through here and they say these ECs, which are Emerging Chemicals of Environmental Concern. And they say, such as PFAS, and we refer to them as emerging chemicals throughout this report. And that's the DoD IG saying ECs are emerging chemicals of environmental concern, such as PFAS, and we refer to them as emerging chemicals throughout the report. So if the DoD IG is concerned about these and they're addressing it, why isn't the rest of the DoD doing the same? You have the IG that's identified it, based on however they come up with it, probably research and fact finding, but we're not hearing too much from other DoD officials or offices that PFAS is considered an emerging chemical. So back to that DoD I 4715.18 defines that, because the previous one we talked about was DoDD 4715.1e. Now we're talking about DoD I 4715.18. And again, I will have the links to these. I don't have the title up here in front of me yet, but I will have links to all of these so you can download and get familiar with them. So 4715.18 defines ECs, emerging chemicals, as chemicals relevant to the DoD that are characterized by a perceived or real threat to human health or the environment, and that have new or changing toxicity values or new or changing human health or environmental regulatory standards. Changes may be due to new science discoveries, detection capabilities, or exposure pathways. Well, let's just take that first part of that paragraph, to where they're saying are characterized by a perceived or real threat to human health or the environment. Now, we know PFAS chemicals back to the 1970s and the 1980s. There is no perceived. There's unclassified military documents that show PFAS chemicals were toxic to fish, and what the way I read the report caused tumors, or let's make it legal here, increased risk of tumors, if you will, on animals, lab animals. Okay, the fact was they exposed fish to PFAS. They died. They exposed lab animals to PFAS. They developed tumors. Okay, let's be real about it. Let's stop bullshitting. Let's stop, as they say, pussyfooting around. PFAS, you can say it's linked. It may cause this. It may do that. Ask the thousands of firefighters that I talk to out there that are, thank God, still with us today. Ask them if it may, or it may cause cancer or illnesses. These individuals are living proof that PFAS exposure, repeated PFAS exposure, elevated levels of PFAS within their bodies causes cancer, tumors, medical conditions, debilitating medical illnesses, has basically destroyed their lives. We talk about how veterans serve and sacrifice. Okay, veterans did not sign up to get sick because of the DoD's failures. And that's exactly how I read this DoD IG report. The DoD itself has failed, and failed miserably, to protect DoD members. They were required to. You heard me previously talking about the DoD D 4715.1E. Before we took a break there. The DoD is required to protect its members. Okay? Every veteran that has served in the military for the longest time, they've done so voluntarily. Okay? They've done so under the belief that those that they are serving, and we're talking about the DoD leaders, okay, they've done so, they've volunteered their time, their lives, because they've put their personal lives on hold to serve their nation, serve millions of individuals they will never ever get to see, but are thankful that support them. They did that voluntarily and said, we will serve. We believe that we're going to be protected. We're going to receive the proper protective equipment, training, knowledge we need to do. We need to have in order to do our job effectively and safely. Folks, we know that's not happening. I've pissed off a lot of DoD officials. Ironically, the DoD Fire Emergency Services are meeting at this very moment in North Carolina, Charlotte, North Carolina. As I'm recording this podcast, they're having their conference down there. Who knows what they're talking about? I hope they're talking about PFAS. I hope they're talking about me, because I'm not going to stop calling out DoD officials. And again, I'm not faulting the firefighters. I'm not faulting the fire chiefs that legitimately did not know the significance of PFAS contamination and the risks associated with it. Those that did know and did nothing, and there's plenty of them out there, I hold them fully responsible and accountable for their actions and inactions. As you see in the DoD IG report, there was a lot of inactions based on what I consider to be a technicality. And we'll talk about those here in a bit. But getting back to this, again, these ECs, emerging chemicals, PFAS is one of them. We know it is a real threat to human health and the environment. There is no perception. We know that for a fact that it is a threat. So 4715.18 defines PFAS as an emerging chemical. So scrolling down through, they get into occupational and environmental health policy. And before we get into this paragraph, again, folks, this is an 82-page report. I'm not going to go verbatim through this report. I just want to pick out some highlights. I want to provide my personal opinions on what I've read and what I know that's going on in the DoD and what I've experienced. I want you to go ahead and take all of that, put it together, mix it up, and come up with your own opinions on this. Because really that's what needs to happen. You need to be able to interpret this IG report as I have, not the same as I have, but going through it, placing things here, placing things there, experiences, research, development, facts, putting it all together and say, here's what I think is going on. So again, it's an 82-page document. There's a lot of information in there. I encourage you to get familiar with it, read it over and over, and then talk about it within your organizations. I hope the DoD fire chiefs are talking about this report because it came out just before they met. Yesterday was day one down there in Charlotte. They're down there, I think, for probably about, all this week. So hopefully somebody is bringing this IG report up and they're talking about it and they're going to create policy, because that's what they do during this fire chief conference. You get all of these major command leaders, the Air Force fire chief is there, the other branches are there as well. So they all come together, and then the DoD overall, all the branch fire chiefs come together and they create policy and procedure and then implement those later on. So occupational health, or occupational and environmental health policy. It goes through, and again, it talks about the USD ANS. They also published DoD M 6055.05, which provides health professionals with information and references appropriate for developing and conducting occupational medical examinations and surveillance prescribed in DoD I 6055.05. So, for example, it says DoD M 6055.05 includes guidance for developing and conducting occupational medical examinations for service members, including annual occupational medical exams for firefighters. Now, we know they've basically adopted the NFPA standard for medical evaluations. That was an easy one. The DoD, the military firefighters, they've adopted NFPA standards. It would just make sense. Hey, the medical community, we're going to do our annual occupational health exam per NFPA. And again, that's why I'm trying to get PFAS blood testing in that NFPA standard. So it's no longer an option. It's a requirement. It's done, over with, and then we can move on from there. Right now, it's just an option. It's not even in the NFPA standard. For civilian firefighters, municipal firefighters, if you were to go to your department, ask for that and go to your company's doctor, they're going to look you in the face and be like, what are you talking about? This isn't required. I don't know what that test is. You don't need it. You're going to get a lot of runaround. So again, the DoD, looking at this document, they provide guidance for developing, conducting occupational medical exams. So that's just a little gee whiz info that's out there. So now it gets into the meat and potatoes that my fire protection emergency service audience members are probably interested in. And the title of this area is DoD Fire and Emergency Services Program. So the USD ANS published DoD I 605506, which requires all DoD organizations to establish a comprehensive Fire and Emergency Services F&ES program. Okay, we know that. You look at Air Force 32-2001, whatever the other service branches are. Because I'm Air Force, I'm familiar with that one. So that's done. I don't think there's a question that it's not being done. It's out there. According to DoD IG-605506, the purpose of the FNES program is to protect DoD personnel, their families, and the public from risk of death, injury, illness, or property damage as a result of DoD activities, and prevent and minimize loss of DoD lives and damage to property and the environment. Before I move on, folks, those that are familiar with this document, okay, again, I'm going to scroll up here. The purpose of the program, and this is the DoD IG stating this, according to DoD 605506, the purpose of the FNES program is to protect, quote, they put it in quotes, DoD personnel, their family, and the public from risk of death, injury, illness, or property damage as a result of DoD activities, end quote. How many of us out there that are either active or former military or DoD civilian firefighters can say that the DoD properly protected us, our families, or the environment because of as a result of DoD activities? I'm not willing to say that they did. In fact, I'll just come right out and say they failed miserably. Knowing what we know today, knowing that firefighters have been repeatedly exposed, knowing that firefighters have died because of the not so much neglect, but the refusal of DoD officials, in my eyes, to properly protect individuals, that's frustrating to say the least. And the paragraph goes on to say the DoD IG-605506 further requires all DoD FNES programs to continuously improve firefighter safety and health, quote, by analyzing work processes to identify firefighter injury and illness, and implement medical surveillance programs in accordance with DoD M-605505, and monitor illness trends, analyze data to focus prevention efforts, and implement mishap prevention initiatives. Again, from what I know, from what I've experienced, the DoD has not done that, or at the least, not done it efficiently and effectively. It's plain to see, folks. When you see firefighters out there that are sick and dying or have died because of AFFF exposure that contain PFAS, before we get into the blood test, right now I'm looking at blood tests. Firefighters have voluntarily sent me their lab results. I'm seeing significantly elevated levels of PFAS in their blood. Excuse me. I told you my voice may end up going here. That tells me they have not properly done what they need to do to protect us. And you look at the PFAS blood test. Well, that's for military and DoD civilians. What about their family members that may be drinking contaminated water? What about their family members that come in contact with that military firefighter or that DoD civilian firefighter's uniforms? Okay, how many firefighters out there? How many active duty DoD military and civilian firefighters are taking their uniforms home? They're taking them to a dry cleaner that could be contaminated with PFAS. Every time you put on your turnout gear over top of that uniform, it's shedding off PFAS dust. It gets on your uniform. Do you take those uniforms home and wash them in your residential washing machine and dryer at home along with your everyday clothes? I'm willing to say a vast majority of you are. If you take it to a dry cleaning facility, are you letting that dry cleaning facility know, hey, there's PFAS contamination in here? Does the dry cleaning facility use PFAS? You know, we can debate this back and forth, but there has to be measures put in place to either minimize or eliminate this unnecessary contamination, this unnecessary exposure, especially cross-contamination between your work and your home. But it goes back to, you know, why aren't the family members being considered in these evaluations, these testing? They should be. They're exposed probably just as much as the firefighter themselves. You know, that's something to be talking about. So let me get a quick drink of my fire department coffee here. Okay, I think I'm good for another 3 hours. No, all right. So as we scroll through, we get into the findings. So that was sort of just the introduction of, you know, things that have been going on. So they get into the finding A. The DoD is identifying, mitigating, and remediating contaminant effects from PFAS containing AFFF. However, the DoD's emerging chemicals program needs improvement. They go through, they talk about this emerging chemicals program officials, how they put PFAS and PFOA was on the EC watch list. So these program officials knew PFAS and PFOA was a concern, so they put it on a watch list. And you're going to notice in this report too, there's a lot of information that's been redacted. It's blacked out. I'd love to know what that information is. I think firefighters, veterans, really the public, has a right to know what they're talking about on here. I don't think whatever they redacted is a matter of national security. Who are they protecting? What are they protecting? I want to see the unredacted copy of this. Hopefully Congress gets it and can shed some light on this. I have some calls with Congress coming up here shortly. We're going to get to the bottom of what was redacted on that. And then if we ever get the truth, you're going to hear it from me here on AFSO21 Radio, the weekend wrap-up. So the EC program officials did issue a risk alert in 2011 that described risks to DoD areas of concern, including risk to human health and the environment regarding PFAS and everything. The IG comes back and it says, DoD officials have not proactively identified, mitigated, and remediated contaminant effects from PFAS-containing materials other than AFFF at DoD installations. Therefore, DoD officials did not apply an enterprise-wide approach to mitigate contaminant effects from all sources of potential PFAS exposure caused by DoD activities, as required by DoD I 4715.18. They didn't come out and say it, but really what they're talking about here is they concentrated on AFFF, but we know PFAS is in turnout gear. We know it's in certain hydraulic fluids, the fire-resistant hydraulic fluids we talked about previously here in the podcast. Food packaging, all of that. So they didn't apply an enterprise-wide approach to mitigate contaminant effects from those sources and others. They just focused. They had their blinders on, tunnel vision. Said, "Oh, we got to deal with AFFF." But while they did that, they totally forgot about everything over here in left field that's sneaking up and contaminating. So you got to look at it. This is my favorite saying: is you got to look at it from a 30,000-foot view. You got to see the big picture, broad brush. Unfortunately, they focused on AFFF and forgot about the other stuff, in particular, turnout gear. So hopefully things change with this. So as we scroll down through, they talk about how DoD officials did not take proactive risk management actions to mitigate contaminant effects from PFAS containing AFFF at DoD installations. Again, although officials are identifying, mitigating, and remediating contaminant effects from PFAS containing AFFF, again, that DoD I-4715.18 requires them to proactively mitigate contaminant effects from ECs at DoD installations. It goes down through. Again, they say they issued this risk alert in 2011 that describe risks to DoD areas of concern, including risks to human health and the environment. However, that 2011 risk alert was not an RMA because it was not endorsed by the EG or ECGC. So this is where you heard me talk about before, that the technicality. Those that are in tune with the legalese of things, this is what you call a classic technicality. Because it wasn't endorsed, the DoD IG is saying, therefore, DoD officials were not required to plan, program, and budget for any actions in response to the 2011 risk alert. EC program officials did not require proactive RMAs for PFAS containing AFFF until 2016. And those that are familiar with 2016, that's when the big AFFF swap started coming out. You know, we saw the email traffic, the back and forth conversations, and then the actual process of swapping out a C8 to a C6 foam took place. And by the way, the C6 foam that's currently in use by the DoD still contains PFAS. Some researchers are saying it is equally, if not more, hazardous than what the C8 foam was. So, you know, we've heard them say, "Oh, C6 foam is eco-friendly; it's more environmentally friendly." No, it's not. So, you know, that's a whole nother story, a whole nother podcast on that. So, so as you're going through this document, you'll see in this particular section they redacted some things in here. So we scroll past that. We got to start going down to way down the document here. Let's see. This one caught my eye, and it stood out because the page is pretty much all redacted. So this particular paragraph, sentence, if you will, stood out. And it says, in August 2008, the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics issued a memorandum to the DoD acquisition community stating, quote, "We do not intend to develop risk management options, RMOs, for PFOA since industry is taking appropriate actions," end quote. So here you have basically the DoD come out and they said they don't plan on taking the initiative to develop these risk management options because they're entrusting the industry to implement those risk management options. Again, folks, entrusting the industry that essentially lied to firefighters for decades, lied to the public for decades. Do you seriously think they didn't implement risk management options since the invention of foam, of AFFF? Do you think they're going to do it now? I don't put very much faith in that. That's me personally talking. That's why the DoD needs to step up and do their own risk management options. Don't rely. A company it goes back to what I said before, folks. These foam manufacturers, while some of them are voluntarily removing PFAS chemicals, they're not required to do so. It's if they want to remain competitive based on the pressure that's coming down on them, they will do it. But again, if they remove PFOA from their product, in order to keep the same characteristics of that foam, they have to replace it with something else. What is that replacement? Is it another PFAS chemical that we have no idea what it is yet? Or will we ever know what it is? Again, these manufacturers are not required to display their ingredients because it's industry trade secrets. It's competitiveness. If they do that, they've lost that market because then everybody is going to create the same thing. That's why there has to be PFAS regulations. There has to be pressure put on these manufacturers from Congress to say you will identify what's in your products. We don't care about your competitiveness. We care about health and safety. And I've said this time and time again, folks, profits over lives. These foam manufacturers, these PFAS manufacturers are putting profits over human life and the environment. Okay? As long as they get that almighty dollar, they, in my opinion, they don't care who gets sick because there's no regulations. There's no enforcement. There's no teeth. Nobody's coming after them and putting them in jail. Oh, sure, there's been numerous, PFAS lawsuits, contamination lawsuits that resulted in, millions of dollars in settlement. These foam manufacturers, these PFAS manufacturers, I hate to say it, and don't get me wrong, I sympathize for those that have died or are sick because of these companies. But these companies look at those individuals as a write-off. They will gladly settle with the sick and dying, write that off, be done with it, and then the very next day, the very next week, they're making the same amount necessary to cover that settlement. I've seen quarterly reports on some of these manufacturers. It's in the billions of dollars. You get a couple $1 million settlement, they make that in a day, folks. I hate to say it. This is why they need to be held accountable. This is why the DoD needs to develop its own risk management options. Don't rely on these companies to go ahead and do that for them. So scrolling down through, title of this section in the report is EC program officials did not require proactive risk management actions for PFAS containing AFFF until 2016. And then there's a little redaction after that. Who knows what they're talking about? It goes down through and it says, therefore, EC program officials did not issue the risk alert in the form of an RMA as defined by DoD I 4715.18. Consequently, it was not a requirement for DoD components to act on the 2011 risk alert. Additionally, installation officials, including firefighters at the 6 current and former military installations and the DLA sites, pardon my pager, were not aware of the 2011 risk alert. So again, the 6 installations, the fire departments that they surveyed, they interviewed basically for this IG report, they were not aware of this 2011 risk alert. Folks, I worked at Air Combat Command Headquarters. I was there for 10 years. I was not aware of this risk alert. So who in the Air Force, who in the DoD had this risk alert, and why was it not socialized throughout the enterprise-wide? Why weren't firefighters especially made aware of this risk alert? Again, we as emergency responders cannot take appropriate action if we don't have information available base our next steps upon. So, we can armchair quarterback, we can say worst case scenario. Had we had this information, proper policy procedures could have been drafted and actions implemented to prevent unnecessary exposure. But it was kept from those that had a need to know, if you will. Then we scroll down, there's a ton more redactions through this document. It baffles me when I see a document like this that's redacted. Not heavily redacted, but it's enough to make you wonder what they're talking about. Then we get down through and it says they're talking about storage and handling and use of PFAS containing AFFF prior to 2016. May have contributed to unnecessary occupational exposure to installation F&ES officials, including firefighters. And the DoD IG folks, they say, we asked firefighters at the military installations we evaluated when they became aware of potential health effects from exposure to PFAS. Firefighters at the 5 current military installations we evaluated were not aware of the risks until 2016, when they received their service-specific policies restricting non-essential use of AFFF, which were written in response to the RMAs issued by the ECGC. So again, dating back to the 1970s, the DoD and foam manufacturers knew that exposure to AFFF was hazardous, it was toxic, it contained PFAS, but it wasn't until 2016 that firefighters were really made aware, and I don't even want to say really made aware, because I saw the emails, I had the conversations while I was in the Air Force. There was really no mention of, hey, AFFF contains PFAS, it's hazardous, it's toxic, this is what you should be doing. Really all they talked about was, well, there's some environmental concerns, so because of those concerns, we're gonna swap out the foam, and we're gonna check the box. But nothing was told to the firefighters, like, hey, you should document everything, exposure reports. None of that stuff was ever done. So I'm just curious what these firefighters at the 5 military installations were told. And if you're a firefighter at one of these installations or any installation out there, whether you're current or former, send me a message either at Facebook or shoot me an email. You can send it to PFAS at AFSO21.com. Comes directly to me. Let me know what you were told about exposure to PFAS, if anything. It's like I said, 20 years in the Air Force, 10 at headquarters, at a staff level. I even had a short stint as a federal contractor at the Pentagon. Never saw any of this information. So somebody kept it close hold. That's the individuals I'm going after to hold accountable and responsible. They're irresponsible for not conveying that information out to the masses, those that had a need to know. So I mean, it's unthinkable that somebody could keep significant information like that to themselves and not share it to those that were in direct contact with this, with toxic PFAS. So as we go down through, they get into finding B, and that is the DoD is identifying populations exposed to PFAS in drinking water, informing them of the associated health and safety concerns, and implementing PFAS blood tests for DoD firefighters. However, the DoD firefighter PFAS blood testing implementation plan needs improvement. That's the IG's statement under finding B. Now, right off the bat, they put a paragraph in here, and it states, DoD officials developed a plan to implement PFAS blood testing for DoD firefighters by FY 2021. as required by the FY 2020 NDAA. We know that's happening. Talk to the firefighters. I've seen the lab test. It's happening out there. But it says, however, DoD officials do not plan to track, trend, and analyze the results of PFAS blood tests conducted on DoD firefighters at DoD-wide level, as required by DoD IG 6055.05. And they go on to say it occurred because DoD officials were more focused on the immediate collection of PFAS blood test results to address that 2020 NDAA requirement, and not on the analysis of the blood test results at a DoD-wide level. So they put their blinders on, tunnel vision. They were running down that rabbit hole, had to check the box, get it done, complete that tasker, that TMT tasker. Air Force folks will know what I'm talking about. And that was it. They said, hey, we're doing what we were told. We're doing blood tests. We're offering blood tests. So now you have thousands of firefighters out there. You know, I'm focusing on Air Force firefighters because that's the majority of who's been reaching out to me. You have thousands of firefighters out there, military and or DoD civilian firefighters, that are saying, they're calling me up, they're messaging me, emailing me. They're like, hey, Kevin, what do these numbers mean? Because my doctor has no clue. They just sent me my results, and there was no follow-up. I tried calling. The doc doesn't know. There's no pamphlets, no fact sheets that are put out there. We feel left in the dark. What's going on with this? So that's where I've been providing information as to what these numbers mean, how to compare it with the CDC NHANES reports, and really educating the firefighters on PFAS contamination. Something the DoD is required to do, but is not doing. So maybe I should charge the DoD for my services. You know, but in all seriousness, how can they come out and tell the Inspector General, the DoD Inspector General, that they don't plan to track, trend, and analyze the results? So they've gathered a baseline. Great on them. We had to start somewhere. I appreciate you're grabbing a baseline of PFAS blood samples. And again, it goes back to, like I said before, if you have not had your blood test done, please do it. Get a baseline, if anything, for yourself. So when you do it, next occupational health exam, you can compare. Is my levels going up? Are they going down? And then you can be a little bit more educated on what those numbers mean. That's how we analyze. That's how we determine when we track, trend, and analyze the results. That's how you find out where the source is. We know it's through foam. We know it's through turnout gear. So how do we implement measures to minimize or eliminate that exposure if we don't know if their levels are increasing? Okay, so you may come through, and I've got one individual sent me their results, and for PFHXS, which is it affects the respiratory system. It also affects your sperm count, guys. It can sterilize you. This particular individual has 18 nanogram per milliliter. When you convert 1 nanogram per milliliter to parts per trillion, it's a million. So it's a 1 to 1 million. So this individual has 18 nanogram per milliliter of PFHXS in their system, which converts to 18 trillion parts per trillion, or 18 million parts per trillion. It's off the chart. Well, not off the chart, but I mean it's up there. So, but yet their doctor is not explaining any of that to them because their doctor has no idea what the numbers mean. The medical community within the DoD is not being proactive. They're testing. Here you go. We check the box. I've got other things I got to do. I'm not going to bother myself getting educated on this. You know, we do it with cholesterol. We do it with our other lipid panels. If you have high cholesterol, what's the doc do? Oh, diet, exercise. Here, we're going to put you on a magic pill and try to control that. Hey, that's what my doc does. They saw the high cholesterol. It's not within normal range. Let's do diet, exercise, put you on medication, try to control that. There's no magic pill, unfortunately, for PFAS. Okay? What we can do is minimize exposure and eliminate the source. But we can't get to that point if we're not tracking, trending, and analyzing the results. So, you know, if they're not doing it, if the DoD is not doing it, folks, do it for yourselves. You know, it's your health. It's, you know, as I've always said, you have to steer your own medical care. Okay, don't rely on, the doctors, they're supposed to know what they're talking about, but we've seen with PFAS, they don't. They're not giving good feedback. They're just leaving individuals in the dark to research on their own. And there's mounds and mounds and mounds of research out there. Firefighters out there, emergency responders, you have a job to do. You need to focus on doing that job. Focus on your families. I've been blessed to go ahead and be able to research, contact individuals, and gather information and provide that to individuals. So that's what I do on this end. So that's why I continue supporting my fire emergency service community. So as it goes on, it says DoD officials have taken steps to identify populations exposed to PFAS in drinking water at DoD installations and inform them of the associated health and safety concerns. And it states in there, it says DoD officials also follow the EPA's recommended actions, including notifying affected populations if PFAS and PFOA levels in sources of drinking water exceeded the lifetime health advisories. We know that has not happened. Now, granted, at Langley Air Force Base, the insanely significant amounts of PFAS and PFOA contamination, the 2.2 million parts per trillion, is in groundwater, on-base groundwater. However, it's gotten into the back river. There's water sources. They pull water from offshore. There's some folks in that area that have wells. There's other installations out there. You look at Cannon Air Force Base, okay, that got into the drinking water system. It wasn't until the public started demanding answers from the Air Force as to why this contamination, where this PFAS came from. If there was not public pressure being put on the DoD and each service branch, folks, I can almost say with 100% certainty, you would not know anything about PFAS right now, or the extent of contamination. The DoD has come out itself and said nearly 700 military installations, either current or former, have or are suspected of having PFAS contamination. Had it not been for public pressure, had it not been for certain media outlets, reporters pushing this, had it not been for firefighters questioning, we very well may not have known the significance of this if it were just left to continue. So, you know, scrolling down through, the DoD firefighter PFAS blood testing implementation plan does not include requirements, like I said, to track, trend, analyze the results. And again, it states in here, according to DoD I 6055.05, passive medical surveillance includes epidemiological review of clinical examination results, conducting analyses to identify health effects from workplace exposures and trending data. Again, there's a DoD instruction that's telling DoD officials to do this testing, this track, trend, and analyzing, but they're not doing it. Why aren't they not doing this, folks? That's what I question. I've tried to reach out to DoD officials. They won't answer. They won't pick up the phone. They won't answer the email. I fully expect that. That's why I go to Congress. That's why we file congressional inquiries. We put these officials on notice, these DoD officials on notice. I encourage audience members that are current out there, current military or DoD civilians, your family members, you have an absolute right to know what's going on. It's a life safety, it's a health safety matter. File a congressional inquiry. Get Congress involved. Get these commanders to start talking, to start doing what they need to do. Get educated. There's some great commanders out there that are being proactive, but there's more that needs to be done. So, going down through, the DoD IG folks said, we asked ODASD, HRPO officials how occupational medicine healthcare providers and DoD firefighters were expected to use their blood test result data. According to their director for force readiness and health assurance policy, occupational medicine healthcare providers will be able to tell DoD firefighters how their individual blood test results compare to the national average of PFAS blood levels in the U.S. population based on age groups. However, occupational medicine healthcare providers will not be able to tell DoD firefighters if their individual blood test results relate to specific health effects because scientists are still learning about the health effects of exposure to PFAS. That's a true statement. What they're going to do if they do it, and those that have had their blood test done, you will notice on there, it talks about the CDC NHANES. It's going to give you some numbers. That's what they're comparing it to. But it's not comparing it to the geometric mean average, which is the average, the CDC's average. There's a different calculation that they use. Yours is probably going to say, those that have had it, it's going to talk about the 95th percentile. So they say 95% of those that surveyed, and it's only a handful. They only surveyed a few thousand individuals for PFAS in these CDC NHANES reports. It's not like they sampled everybody in the United States. They only took a few thousand. So they say, okay, based on that, we come up with this calculation. 95% have this level or below. So that's what they're saying. If you see on there, you fall under the 95th percentile. But they're not showing you what the average is on that. And on a lot of these analytes, these PFAS substances that they were tested for, firefighters were tested for, PFAS, over 50% have elevated levels. PFOA, same thing. PFHXS, 92% of those that provided me their data have elevated levels. The highest so far being 18, many between 10 and 12. The next step down about 7 to 9 in there. So again, these are analytes, these are substances that cause debilitating health issues within the human body, but yet the DoD medical community is not talking about it. So hopefully they do. Hopefully they start saying, hey, this is, but see, it's real vague. So you're going to go in and they're just going to say, well, this is how you compare to what the CDC did. And when they say, yeah, we can't tell you exactly what health effects these levels are, I get it. Researchers are working. It's going to be years, probably decades down the road, to where they can actually fingerprint. They can come in and they can say, okay, well, you've got this type of cancer. Let's sample, let's do biopsies and stuff. And then they'll be able to pinpoint that cancer to a specific PFAS chemical that you were exposed to. And then you can sort of cross-reference and say, oh yeah, that came from foam, that came from turnout gear, that came from food packaging or whatever. So that's years down the road, that fingerprinting. They're working on it. Hopefully it's done quick. But so scrolling more down through, again, they say without tracking, trending, and analyzing PFAS blood test results, DoD officials will not know the extent or the effect of PFAS exposure. That's true. That's why it's extremely important. If the DoD is not doing it, please on a personal level, you should be doing it. Audience members that get your PFAS blood tested, track it, track trend, analyze yourself. I'm more than happy to assist in providing you that information, on how to track trend and analyze PFAS. So then it goes through. It's got the appendix and everything. So that's it. In a nutshell, what this DoD IG report is. Let me get another cup of fire department coffee here. My voice is still going, so thanks to fire department coffee, keeps me going. So, as I said, folks, I consider as you read through this, I only hit on the highlights. There's a lot of other information within this DoD IG report that I consider to be explosive. It's eye-opening. It's alarming. It basically, in a nutshell, is saying, look, the DoD has failed to protect personnel. They failed to take certain actions that could have prevented unnecessary exposure due to technicalities. It happens all the time. We see it in the criminal processes. You get a defendant, they're let go because of a technicality. That's what's going on here within the DoD. In my opinion, their lack of action or what's the word? Oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank here, folks. Their lack of action or initiative, if you will, to be proactive, to me, that's criminal. Again, knowing what we know today, and DoD officials, senior leaders had this information at hand. They had access to this within the DoD system. It wasn't like it was in, it wasn't in a vault somewhere and, buried behind a wall, a brick wall. This information was out there because somebody FOIA'd, they did a FOIA request for this information and accessed it. And that was a bombshell then when these documents came out. The EWG, Environmental Working Group, did a great job getting this information, compiling it into a timeline. We'll have a link to that. You can see what I'm talking about in terms of the fish kill studies, the lab animal studies and everything. But in my opinion, folks, this is who's ever responsible for this DoD IG report. They did a great job. There's more that needs to be done. I think this is just the start of this internal affairs inspection assessment, if you will, the uncovering of the truth, the start of moving forward. Whoever led this, hats off to you and your team for doing this, because I'm sure this was not an easy task to take on. But again, there's more that has to be done. So, like I said, folks, I'm going to provide the links to all of this. If you have questions, concerns, comments about this, feel free to message. Put it up on our social media site, AFSO21 The Weekend Wrap Up on Facebook. You can send an email to me. Send it to, because this deals with PFAS, send it to PFAS, PFAS at AFSO21.com. I'm more than happy to go ahead and discuss this. We're actually gonna have some more discussions with this later on down the road. So with that, folks, my mouth is actually dry, even though fire department coffee is keeping me awake here. That's all I got for now. If I was rambling, this is important. We got to get this out there for you folks and start discussing this within our local communities, our local organizations. So So with that, folks, as always, stay safe. Keep supporting your fire emergency services out there. Yeah, that's gonna do it for this episode of AFSO21 Radio, the Weekend Wrap Up. I've been your host, Kevin Ferrara. I hope you enjoyed this. Make sure you give us a like on Facebook. Give us a subscribe on YouTube. Your support keeps us going, so we can provide you the uncut, raw information and opinions out there. So with that, folks, I'm out of here.